Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are here for a 1-hour session on managing your supply chain during times of uncertainty. For anybody out there who doesn't know me, my name is Rachel Behar. I head up our digital marketing here at Mahoney Performance Institute. I'll be monitoring the chat box and the Q&A throughout our session today and compiling all for some time that we have reserved on the back end. We have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions that we'll take at the end. So throughout the presentation today and the conversation, please feel free to send your questions my way and we will share them later on. We are also recording this session and that will be shared with you after the presentation today. So you can either watch it back or share it with the rest of your team. On that note, I will kick it off and hand it over to our CEO and founder, Sean Mahoney.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our quarter two kickoff. We're excited to have you, and we're really excited about the two panelists we have. We think that this is a very important topic. We've all been challenged, whether you're in a service business or a manufacturing business, it really doesn't matter. There have been challenges after challenges in managing supply chain, and I think that the truth of the matter is that probably it's here to stay, at least for the next year or two. So we thought it would be a great topic for everyone. And I'm joined today by Adam Stiles and Paul Fatuccia. And I selected both of them as panelists or asked them to join us. Adam's in a manufacturing business and Paul's in more of a service business. And I thought being able to leverage really some of the challenges in both maybe will make any one of our businesses a little bit better. So we're excited to have them. So Adam, if you would just quickly introduce yourself and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Stiles. I'm the COO of Specialty Silicone Products. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the things we've done over the past 2 years now.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Paul?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Sean, for asking me to join this panel this morning. I'm very excited to talk to your folks on the screen. I am the newly appointed president and CEO of A&S Advanced Network Services, and have a lot of experience in supply chain as part of our organization. So hopefully I can share some of that insight with you as well.
Great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the stage just so that you'll have a feel for how this is going to roll today. I want to set the stage. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've seen. We've done some research. Obviously, we've experienced some of it firsthand, but share some statistics with you to set the stage. And then I'm going to move right into questions, where I'm going to be asking Adam Stiles questions first and foremost, and then I'll move on to Paul. We want to make sure that we have about 15 minutes on the back end for questions for all of you. So, and Rachel will be monitoring the chat box, like she said before. So I think it'll hopefully go well. So let's talk about supply chain. What are some of the statistics out there? First of all, companies do believe and management teams do believe that supply chain can be a competitive advantage. However, in our research, we also found that only 22% of companies out there feel like they have a proactive approach to supply chain networking and building that out. So it's important, but at the same time, people don't feel like they're really managing it proactively. The second slide is really about accuracy. And I think this is one of the big challenges we've all had. I know that in speaking with Paul and speaking with Adam, that supply chain accuracy, you're expecting that some of your materials are going to be there and then they're not. And what's the impact? The impact on a service business and manufacturing business can be somewhat similar, but it can also be very different. It has had a huge impact on finances. I think that everyone's felt that with the extended timeframes for that. And I think probably the bigger thing is that as much as we're trying to, I think all of us proactively manage the reputational damage, it is something that's real. Customers aren't happy when they can't get their finished product on time. And so the actual reputational hit is as significant as anything. So we all know, we've seen pictures, we've read about it, and probably got reports from our suppliers, congested ports and problems associated with that. Obviously is a big deal. The research that we've done says that, you know, the typical typically the containers in transit are in transit, you know, 20% longer than they were before the pandemic. Prices for shipping up 80% year over year, which is significant, and obviously we're all feeling it to a certain degree. So those are big things that are happening out there. Whether you realize it or not, 90% of the world's merchandise is shipped by sea. So that is a huge issue. And obviously shipping costs are going up significantly. And, you know, over time, you know, obviously the impact of the war that we have going on in Ukraine is also starting to have even a larger impact on it. So the pandemic was one thing, but we've gotten this double whammy now with the war. So we've seen prices come down a little bit on this, but it's just, you know, it's exponential, going from an average of $1,300.31 for a 40-foot container to $11,109, and that was just in September. So obviously costs are going up significantly. So what we did is we tried to bring together two panelists that we thought could probably shed some light on some of the things that they're doing. I know both of them are working proactively. So when we had that first slide that I talked about in terms of how many companies, what percentage are really managing things proactively, I thought of Adam Stiles immediately. So Adam, I'm just going to give you his background before I start asking him a couple of questions. So for those of you that don't know SSP, which is Specialty Silicone Products, it was founded in 1989. It was employees of GE Silicones. They celebrated their 25th anniversary in 2015. They've got 70 plus employees. Got a 54,000 square foot facility where they manufacture their goods, and Adam's going to tell you a little bit about it. Adam's been with SSP for a decent ride here. He's been there since 2008. He really has worked along with Paul DiCaprio to position SSP for long-term growth, not only getting through the COVID challenge, but also probably the worst silicone rubber shortage in history. Really, of the 70 plus employees, 50 plus of them report up through Adam. So we're really excited to have Adam with us today. So anyway, what I'd like to do is I'm going to kick off. I've got three key questions that I'd like to ask each of the panelists. So we're going to start with Adam, and then I'll shift over to Paul. So Adam, if you could just spend a couple of minutes telling us about this challenge that we have and that you have with the supply chain. Specifically, what have been your greatest challenges?
Sure, happy to. So one thing I would add to our history, Sean, is that in 2018, we were acquired by Heiko Corporation, and that was a total acquisition. So we rode out a lot of these challenges with new ownership. So we got to know each other a lot better during that time frame than we might have if we hadn't gone through this. So that was an interesting twist in some of this as well.
Right.
But our challenges, you know, we saw our business dip in about March of 2020, and then by probably January of 2021, it was like somebody flipped a switch and we saw this step change in our business, and it was totally unforecasted. So all of a sudden demand came back up, and we were trying to rev up our supply chain to respond. So we had really scaled our staff and our supply chain to match the rate of our pandemic revenue. So we started to see signs of supply chain issues right around January or February of 2021. The issues in Texas when there was that deep freeze really impacted the plastic resin market, which is something we source and consume. And that was the first time we really felt it. And it didn't take much longer. It was about 2 months longer when we started getting allocation notices from our silicone rubber suppliers. So, we take silicone rubber made by large chemical companies. There's only a few of them, and we blend them together to make unique properties. So without, without silicone, we're stuck. So after April, I think it was, by around July, we started to get another allocation notice from our primary vendor. We were getting about 50% of what we normally would take or what we wanted to take. So it happened very quickly. It was unexpected. So that showed us, we had some difficult decisions to make pretty quickly. Some of the challenges we faced when this happened, we were really tip of the spear, I would say, and not in a good way. The chemical industry started to get hit first by some of the supply chain issues, and not everybody was aware of that. So we had customers that, while our products that we make for them contain silicone, they really didn't understand all the logistical and supply chain challenges that happened to cause us to not have materials. So we had the challenge of really educating them, and I would say maintaining their trust. It was, that was one of the biggest things that they really felt we were somehow holding out on them at first. Supply chain issues for us were like whack-a-mole, like a game of whack-a-mole. So, we'd have one that would be a problem, that would resolve, and then almost immediately something else would pop up. And so it was this game of just trying to, keep up with what was going on and keep up with, where can we alternatively source materials. Another challenge for us, in any given year, we produce probably several thousand iterations of our products. So managing the inventory of the raw materials, of our WIP, of our finished goods, where those products go to which customers, that was a sudden and immediate challenge. We're also a customer intimate organization. So for the first time in my history here, we really couldn't be. We became difficult to work with overnight. So that was a big challenge. How do we manage that with our customers? And then the last piece that was a challenge for us, on the heels of the day-to-day nuances of the pandemic, we then had, to manage our team internally, because we had this new frustration of, are we going to have raw materials? Where are they coming from? We needed folks to be more flexible and move around. So for us, it was all encompassing. It was internal and external that we saw all of these challenges.
Yeah. So Adam, that's a great background on the challenges, and I suspect that everyone felt some of the same things that you were talking about. Maybe talk a little bit about what adjustments you've made in order to address it since the beginning of the pandemic.
Sure, many adjustments. So the first thing that we decided as a business was that we were going to communicate with our customers as transparently as we could. And the intention was not to scare them. Really the intention was to try to maintain trust, to try to really help them understand why we weren't necessarily going to be able to serve them in the capacity we had in the past. So we used lots of different tools. We used Zoom calls, we used email campaigns. We tried to do blog posts and kind of blast them out. And we used like a frequently asked questions format to do that. It was a way to try to anticipate or put ourselves in the shoes of our customers, so that they would appreciate that we know the challenge for them as well. And we spent a lot of time just trying to educate them on why not all silicones are created equal. So you can't necessarily just swap product A for product B and get the same thing. So we really, it was that fine line every day about, not scaring them, but setting expectations that were realistic and just trying to, treat them as true partners through the process. So that was one element of it. Immediately in July, we sat down and developed a contingency plan of, all the what if scenarios. We had to do that because, we really didn't know at that point what was coming and when. We had some idea. We started to see 1 or 2 missed shipments from vendors or delayed shipments, so we really felt that we needed to have that contingency plan. We made some tough choices early on, really difficult decisions about which products we would make, which products we wouldn't make, and that then became part of the communication strategy. One thing I would say is that when you're delivering a piece of bad news for the 15th time, sometimes you have to remember that the customer you're talking to in the moment, they're hearing it for the first time. So we talked a lot about, internally about empathy and understanding for, what was at times really tough conversations. When and where we could offer alternatives, we did, but that was not always, possible. But one thing I would say is that, despite the challenges, despite the fewer raw materials, we were fortunate that those tough decisions did allow us to recover a lot of the revenue that we lost in 2020 when demand, dropped. And then in 2022, still not getting all the material that we want, we're on pace for record revenue, and that's not all because of price increases. And that's my next thing that we addressed early on was pricing of products. So we tried to pool together our cost increases from our vendors and then pass them on. That was part of the communication strategy. Again, very, very transparent with our customers. Some folks that we know have had immediately pass on price increases. We've tried to break it up a little bit for our customers. It's just easier for them to manage. Mm-hmm. We asked our supply chain team to, basically track all of the consumption of our key raw materials, and then we imposed basically production ceilings. So what we did was we tried to match our staffing and the use of our raw materials to what we expected to be getting from our vendors and when we thought we were going to be getting it. And this way we didn't run out, we were never lying down, and we didn't have team members standing around without stuff to make. Mm-hmm. We also did qualify as many raw materials as we could, or alternative raw materials, knowing that we weren't necessarily going to be able to use them right away. And in some cases, we did that, placed orders, and waited about anywhere from 3 to 6 months to get that material, and then that kind of became a safety or fallback position for us. One other thing that we did that I think some folks might discount, we leveraged some, we'll say, friendly competitor relationships. So maybe our businesses are analogous. We sort of compete in some of the circles, but not really, because we have different strengths and weaknesses. So we tried to actually get a little bit closer to them, and it was mutually beneficial. It helped steer us in different directions for raw materials. Sometimes there was hey, I don't need this material right now, we can swap. So that proved to be very beneficial, and some folks might say, that's how do you talk to a competitor? It was only in certain markets, and it made sense to do it, and it paid off. And then the last thing I would add is we communicated as best we could internally. So we were sensitive to the fact that the team was fatigued from COVID. Now there was the uncertainty of raw material supply, so we tried to, tell them as much as we could. We tried to, again, be realistic with them about what we thought was coming, and really ask for patience, flexibility, and help in a lot of ways. We asked them to help out in different ways, and I think, I credit our team here because I knew they were exhausted from all the COVID, matters, and then this kind of came on the heels of it, and they handled it, took it in stride, and I'm proud of what we accomplished through it. So those are the adjustments that I thought of that we made, Sean.
Yeah. So one last question before I flip over to Paul Fatuccia. So obviously you read lots of stuff saying, hey, the supply chain is going to improve toward the second half of this year into next year, and obviously the war has sort of thrown a little bit of a wrench into all of that. But what changes have come about that you think are here to stay? no matter what, in terms of the way that you're approaching your business, the way that you're working with your suppliers. I mean, what are some takeaways that you think, it's going to be long beyond us getting through this sort of the short-term problems?
Sure. Well, I can tell you we're going to think about our safety stock, our stocking levels quite a bit differently. And I forgot to mention, we shifted our business from basically a made to stock setup to made to order to maintain material flexibility. That was another big thing that we did. So I suspect that some element of that will continue. We'll look carefully at what we are making, what we're keeping in with. We will increase inventory of our raw materials as much as we can, as much as our vendors will support. But I suspect that will be here to stay because, especially, for us, again, a key raw material like silicone, all the variations that we bring in, if we don't have it, we're out of business. So that is one thing that we will for sure maintain. I think we'll continue to leverage those relationships that we built. I think they were very beneficial. Whether it's, again, a friendly competitor or some industry insiders, I don't see that going away. We're going to, for sure, beef up our dual sourcing strategy. And that's already underway now. So it's across the board. It's all the materials that we use. I would say our top, for sure, our top 20 to 30 inputs, we're looking at them actively, making sure we have alternatives should we need them. Yeah. And I think the other thing that we learned, even if the situation improves, as you just mentioned, Sean, there's so much that's dynamic in the world right now. I expect our communication strategy to continue the way it is, to be as open as we can. So whether it's email blasts, whether it's routine Zoom calls with customers, I suspect that's going to continue, because even if we start to get all the raw materials we want again, then we're going to now have to start to shift towards managing, what's true demand, what's true growth potential, and we're going to get back to business that way. So it'll just be a little bit of a better problem to have at that point.
Awesome. Great insights, great thoughts. I'm sure there's going to be some questions out there for you as well, Adam. So obviously, Adam on the manufacturing side, and I want to just flip over now, talk a little bit with Paul Fatuccia. So he's in more of a service business, heavily reliant on raw materials, as you'll hear from him. But A&S Advanced Network Services started in 1991. Serves the communications and telephone networks in enterprise and higher education. Now a publicly owned company. They were acquired by Charge Enterprises, and Paul's got some exciting news related to that. 175 employees. Paul's been with A&S since 1999, so it goes back quite a few years. He's really been the driver of an aggressive expansion of the company's services and footprint, and extended their presence, into Florida, the Mid-Atlantic regions, services big customers and added big customers, T-Mobile, AT&T, Sprint, to their roster, based here in Albany, New York. So very excited to have you, Paul, as well. I've known you obviously for a lot of those years, and it's exciting to have you on board. So similar to Adam, I'm going to ask you some of the same questions. But before we do, did I butcher anything up? Is there anything else you'd like to tell the crowd?
No. And once again, thanks for having me this morning. I really appreciate it. And Sean, as you know, you've been a mentor for me for many, many years. And, I've gained a lot from working with you as well. I was always an engineer and an operations guy. I knew nothing about business, and I owe everything that I know about business to Sean. So thank you. But very similarly, to Adam's story, we were acquired last year, as Sean alluded to, and the big news is that tomorrow we will be ringing the bell at the NASDAQ in Manhattan, as we were just uplisted to NASDAQ. So that's very exciting. And similar to Adam, we went through this whole material shortage from an electronic standpoint in the chip world, as well as raw materials. And, communication is really at the forefront of what we needed to do to not only communicate up the chain to management internally, but also externally with our customers. So keeping them in the loop every minute of every day is critical to success managing through this stuff.
Yeah. So in terms of the biggest challenges that you have had, Paul, maybe just give us some thoughts on some of the specific challenges that your team has encountered. Going back to the beginning of the pandemic, obviously the challenges were one thing, but now we have a war, other things. So what have been your greatest challenges?
Sure. So during the pandemic, it was very different. We were a critical service, so we needed to keep our employees working and safe during the pandemic. So that was one challenge. And also at the same time, we started to see the material shortages start creeping in at the tail end of COVID in 2020. And with us, it really hit us on two fronts. One was in the chip shortage. So as you hear about chips being short for the auto manufacturer, which is one that's really publicized a lot today, it's also affected us on the communication side, both with the electronics that we install in data centers, like you see behind me, but also on the electronics and the radios that we install in the cellular network, whether it's in an in-building application or in a cell tower application. We started to see some large shortages of these products. The other piece was really in the raw materials for us in the form of copper and steel. As part of our process, we install, electronics, and copper cabling is a significant component of the deployments that we do. So managing twofold with the copper and the steel was the significant increase in pricing, and then also the shortage of available product to install. So we deployed a bunch of different strategies to mitigate those. On the electronics side, we typically don't buy the electronics. They're supplied by the end customer. So for example, Sean talked a little bit about the customer base that we have, Verizon and the federal government, things of that nature. They supply most of the electronics. They ship them to our warehouses. We stage them with what's called ancillary material, which is the cabling, the steel, the connectors, things of that nature. And then we deploy them to the site. So fortunately, our end customer has visibility to the shortage of the electronics. Though even though they see that shortage because they're the ones shipping it to us, they still kind of hold their feet to the fire for getting projects done. So we had to deploy a multitude of strategies to be able to do that. And one is really just talking to the project managers that we interface with on a daily basis and say, hey, what's your pipeline? What do you critically need to get done and get on air to meet your customers' demands? And so that would shift on a daily basis. So as product came in, we would reprioritize the sites that we would go out to deploy equipment. And that was one strategy that we utilized. As we get further down the process, we start getting more shortages in materials, but we still have a significant backlog of projects that we need to complete. So we deployed a different strategy where instead of going to the site on one occasion, we would actually deploy and do the physical build. For example, for building a new cell tower, we would do the concrete work, we would stack the steel, get that all prepped, and then we would retract our crews. And then once the electronics came to us, we would redeploy. So in some cases, an average project like that is about 30 days in nature. But because of these shortages, we were seeing timeframes in the vein of 6 months to be able to do that. So more costly because we're not as efficient. And in some cases, we could pass those inefficiencies back to the customers. Most cases, we could not. So it's really juggling the schedule is the biggest component in communicating with the customers as to when we could complete jobs.
So when you say juggling the schedule, it's that, you've got you've got 175 employees. Many of them are the installation team and things of that nature. So being able to manage that schedule against the materials that you had available to do the installation was a huge challenge.
Correct. And fortunately, we have 18 project managers on staff that's what they do on a daily basis. Mitigate issues, communicate with the customer, and then shift those resources around. We've also had to cross-train some of those folks to be able to do other functions within the organization, so that we didn't incur downtime associated with the installation. And in some cases, we took on different types of projects that required less material and more labor, but also cross-training those folks to do different things, whether it was site surveys on top of just their installation practice.
Gotcha. So Paul, similar to Adam, you sort of addressed, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to address relative to the second question in terms of adjustments you've had to make in your business. But if not, then, maybe talk a little bit about what changes are here to stay in your business, you think. We get beyond this struggle that we have with supply chain, the short-term struggle. Has the pandemic, now the war, other things made sort of long-lasting changes in your business or adjustments that you've had to make?
Sure. So on the first side of the question, we definitely deployed similar strategies to what Adam talked about. We definitely increased the amount of vendors that we looked at from a supply chain standpoint. So we had in the past about 50 vendors or so that we would buy on a regular basis. And typically our spend for cable and steel and things of that nature is about $5-6 million annually. So it's a pretty significant piece of our revenue. But what we did is we did look to other suppliers to be able to expand our view as to who we were buying product from. So that was number one. Number two, similar to Adam again, we did talk a lot to our competitors. Now, probably a little different than in the manufacturing world. We're part of some consortiums that have like companies. For example, we're part of an organization called NATE, National Association of Telecom Erectors. So it's basically a group of companies like us that work across the globe to implement cell tower and video or TV and radio towers. And we were able to, in some cases, utilize some of the product that they might have had sitting around in their warehouses. And conversely, they were able to use some of ours. So that, being part of those consortiums, it's always been beneficial, but I think in this time, it's been even more significant of a play for us to be involved with them and know what's going on. So that's number one. And then as far as lasting changes, there's been several. One is we've really increased our communication and less email blasts, but more direct one-on-one conversations with the project managers. Typically we were doing it on a weekly basis. Today we're doing it almost on a daily basis, communicating that. So that's a significant change to the way we manage our projects. And then two, really what we've learned is the flexibility of being able to move those crews around and go in and out of projects. And we've had to gain efficiencies from doing that. So really looking at our entire amount of projects that we have on hand at any given time to really see where we can cluster them together to gain efficiency, so we're not moving from one end of the state to another. So different than Adam, we're spread out pretty far from Chicago to Boston to Washington, D.C. primarily. And so trying to cluster those folks in a geographical area to meet the customer's need has been really good for us and helped us gain efficiency.
Great.
The other thing too, on the back end is the increased price. You had alluded to it in your opening slides. But for example, we've seen 7, 8, 9, close to 10 times the increase of product that in some cases when we bid projects, we're not necessarily, so we typically get tied into a time frame associated with that project life cycle. And so when we bid projects, we kind of get locked into what the material costs are. Given that we're seeing these increases at a much higher rate, we've actually added a lot of language in our contracts to allow us to hold the time frame associated with purchasing material to a shorter time frame, so not have it being open-ended. That's number one. And number two, building in the flexibility to actually hit them up with change orders for that increased material price. In not all cases are they acceptant of that, but in many cases they are. They understand what's going on because fortunately we work with large scale companies that are also seeing those increases. So it makes it easier to communicate that message.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, first of all, before we open it up for other questions, I think Rachel, you're going to probably have some questions out there that we're going to need to address. But before we do any questions, Adam or Paul, of each other, or we're in pretty good?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and Adam, I know we know each other and stuff, but have you seen this really affect your business month to month or quarter to quarter from a financial standpoint?
Yeah, we did. We saw it. So we saw it during, the beginning of the pandemic. Like I said, in March, things dropped off. And then once our material shortage took hold, we basically could predict almost exactly what our revenue would be during that time frame because we dialed in that mix of products that we were going to make, and we couldn't make any more than that because we would run out. So we saw our backlog go up, and our production rates stay pretty steady. So we certainly did. And then in terms of our profitability, we saw impacts there. We saw costs going up, and similar to you, we've tried to manage that and pass that on as best we can to our customers. Yeah. How about you?
Same thing. It's interesting, even though we're in very different businesses, there's so many similarities there. Same thing. We definitely saw a hit in gross profit. We've seen our backlog increase significantly. Our backlog is larger than it's ever been. So in both areas, we've had to manage, less money coming in the door, more backlog, and the employees, as well as communicating that up the chain to management as well.
One question I had for the two of you that I thought was kind of interesting. You talked a lot about, the communication with vendors. You talked obviously a lot about communication with customers. What about other stakeholders? So when I think about both of your businesses, you're both owned by public companies now. So managing the message and the impact, and obviously you just mentioned financial impact was important, but also employees. You figure the people that are in sales roles that are having to go back and talk to customers, that's got to be a morale impact. When you think about people that are in customer support functions of any sort and having to deal with all this, has there been any training or messaging or anything like that you've had to do in order to address that? And either one of you can go. Sure.
I'll take that if you don't mind. So, interestingly enough, about a couple of years ago, we deployed a strategy to better communicate with our employees internally, and that's really been very beneficial. So we did it monthly initially. It was called Tooch's Couch. So it's an all-employee once a month 30-minute meeting to kind of give the State of the Union or a fireside chat, whatever you want to refer it to. But it's really in an effort to be transparent with our internal folks as to let them know exactly where we are. So when COVID hit, we went to a weekly fireside chat to let everybody know just, hey, how do we keep everybody safe? How do we make sure we keep working? what are some of the best practices that are out there, things of that nature. And then as we moved away from the COVID issue and back into a normal monthly cadence, we also noticed that with this material shortage, we had to have additional meetings besides that once a month to kind of let everybody know what's going on. So that's been very beneficial. We've tried to keep it a very static meeting in where we recognize employees for achievement, but we also let them know about our financial situation and any operational adjustments that we have to make within the organization to keep the ship sailing. So that's kind of what we've deployed from an internal communication standpoint. From a kicking it up to executive management at the charge level, similar strategy. We have a monthly call with the stakeholders within the executive team to kind of propagate that same message.
Great. Adam, any thoughts from your business?
Yeah, we did a lot of similar things without talking to one another, but we did weekly meetings during the peak of COVID that did kind of shift towards monthly, and then as the team grew a little more fatigued from some of the no change on this and just the day-to-day of the COVID challenges, we started to keep the team up to date as much as we needed to, sometimes monthly, sometimes sooner, based on the supply chain issues. So, especially if it started to get a little tight, we'll say, on some of the raw materials, that's when we'd pull everyone together. And then if there was good news, we'd pull everybody together too. That was, often a sigh of relief. So we tried to communicate with them. We tried to understand their concerns, right? It's scary if you're not going to have raw material. So we tried to be as empathetic as we could to their concerns. And again, for us, a lot of the communication was also asking for flexibility. So certain areas of the plant, we might have excess raw materials versus areas of the plant where we were deficient. So we would move folks around, probably improved our cross-training of some employees a little bit more during that time. So asking them to do that and be flexible, was very, very important, and something we felt strongly about. And then, managing with Heiko. Heiko's a unique parent company in that they manage or own, I should say, 70 plus subsidiaries around the world. So of which we are one. So their whole philosophy is to buy a business and have them manage it, and they aren't really involved in the day-to-day. So the things that we would communicate to them, they weren't necessarily surprised because they were hearing it, different products or different materials or different markets, but they were hearing similar things about the supply chain challenges from other subsidiaries, and some of them fared better, others fared worse. I think we were a little bit in the middle or above average through all this compared to some. But communicating with them was very important, and as I mentioned early on, we got to know them a lot better, and what their values were as well. So it was if there was a bright spot in all of this, it was just getting a little bit tighter with them and building that relationship.
Great. All right, Rachel Behar, are we ready to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions? I think we've got a couple out there already, but if any of you are on the line and you have a follow-up question or any questions for Paul and Adam, we'd love to take them at this point. We're right on time. We're right at 15 minutes before the end of the webinar. So it's most important that we answer your questions. So Rachel?
Yeah, we've had some good ones come in. So this first one is both for you, Paul and Adam. The question reads, as you increase or continue the effort with finding dual sources, how did you structure your procurement teams, supplier quality teams to support this effort? Did you have to grow your teams during these supply chain issues and also to help support the dual source effort? Curious how you both supported your staffing levels.
Adam, you want to start?
Who's going to go? Sure. So we've been fairly conservative on staffing levels. We're really just now, within the past, I would say 3 to 4 months, taking a look at it a little bit differently. But again, with all the uncertainty, we really tried to match our staffing to whether it was out on the production floor or in the business, but we tried to match it to what we thought was sustainable. I would say what we did to help them. So I mentioned earlier flexibility. That wasn't just on the production floor. That was throughout the entire business. And I commend our team for a great job of helping out in areas that might be outside their expertise. So for us, we have an R&D team that was evaluating those raw materials, turning around those evaluations, sharing that data as quickly as possible. At certain points of the challenge, we could say, we leveraged even the president of our business, Paul DiCaprio, to as one of our team members joke, he was our silicone broker. So he was, calling around, wheeling and dealing, trying to find stuff. And so we leveraged him and at times even our parent company to help apply some pressure. And then I think the quality portion of it was another part of the question. So we are oftentimes bound by our customers with very stringent change control management requirements. There's just no way around it. The applications we serve in aerospace, healthcare, defense, all of those, our customers have very high standards, and internally we do as well. So this was really the first time we put that to the test. We at times had some, we'll say, disagreement with some of our customers about, what does qualified mean? When can you pull the trigger? And at the end of the day, everybody understood why we made the changes we did, why we onboarded new suppliers the way we did when we did. It worked out because I'm happy to say we really never got to a line down situation in all of this, and might have taken longer than our customers wanted, but they got it. They got the material. So, yeah, that's what we've done.
Paul?
Yeah, and from our perspective, we've got a fairly robust back office operation within our organization, and so what we did is we've always had a dedicated procurement staff looking at doing purchasing and working with our vendors. And we've also utilized our engineering team to work with vendors as well to actually find new product or products that they need to as part of their projects. So what we did is we actually cross-trained some folks in the back office to actually support the procurement function. So we engaged more resources that we had. So we didn't initially hire more folks to do that. We just brought more folks into the mix to be able to do that function. So that was on the purchasing side. And then we also allowed the engineers to, reach out to new vendors that we may have not worked in the past and try to establish relationships and new contracts and working agreements with new vendors. So even though we didn't hire more folks from a back office perspective or an engineering perspective, we actually increased the bandwidth by just utilizing the existing resources that we had a little differently.
So this next question is about cost, and it reads, with the increased cost of doing business during supply chain disruptions, how have you passed through those increases to your customers, and how much have you absorbed?
So I'll take that one if you don't mind. We, like I mentioned earlier, we have tried to pass as much of that cost back on to our customers. I don't have any definitive data as far as percentages of how much of that we've been able to push back and how much we haven't. My gut feeling is it's probably a 50-50 mix. About half of the time we've been able to push those costs on. About half of the time we've had to eat those costs internally. And so we see that and a dip in our gross margin. So it's kind of difficult to quantify, given the nature of our business. So as we bid new projects, we're able to build that in. The stuff that's been sitting on our books from a backlog perspective has been more difficult to get our customers to pay for those increases.
Yeah. Adam?
Yeah, so we passed on, what we could as well. Our strategy was to try to collect, what the anticipated increases were going to be from our vendors early on, estimate the total impact, and then try to spread that out across our business line. And sometimes the product lines saw different increases depending on either the impact of that, a certain input, or because, again, we believed we could get what we needed to from those product lines. So I will say, we were somewhat fortunate because some of the larger companies were really used to it, and we weren't the first to act. So while we communicated the challenges to our customers early on, we didn't act first. We had a little bit of a wait and see approach, and that actually worked out to our advantage because our competitors in many instances were more aggressive than we needed to be, which helped us cover as much of the cost as possible. So a little bit of pain in that interim period kind of paid off because we looked a little bit better than our competitors for managing costs. But it's still a problem. We're still seeing increases all the time, and now we're trying to capture them and model out, or forecast out what the impact will be. And I suspect that we'll be making some decisions in the next couple of months as to, can we hold or do we need to pass on an increase?
And one more question for you both, and this is more specifically related to costs. How were you both handling the major increase in fuel charges?
What I can say about that, so our customers, the way that they buy from us, a lot of them have their own freight forwarders that they use, so they've negotiated those rates. Again, if they're a large company sourcing from many, many, many vendors worldwide, they're going to have that. So they are really absorbing that. The smaller customers that we have of various sizes where they're buying, one box or still many boxes, but not pallet size, a lot of that stuff is shipped prepay and add. So it's quoted per order. I highly recommend that if you can do that. And then we've set things up with our vendors where the freight is generally included in the cost of the material. So it just gets rolled in, and that kind of stabilizes things a little bit. Again, not everybody has that luxury, but those were things that we've tried to do to minimize potential spikes in fuel. It's certainly a challenge. We've seen it. We've seen the costs go up.
Paul, anything on that?
Sure. So with us, the increased fuel cost has hit us really in three ways. One, we have close to 50 trucks and vans out on the road, as well as a couple delivery trucks. So that increase in cost has been a direct hit to our bottom line. So that's number one. Number two, we've had to increase our mileage payback to our employees because of that. And we kind of developed a flexible scale that we didn't have in the past, where today, as price increases, we flex our amount of money that we give our employees for fuel. And then conversely, if the fuel starts going back down, excuse me, that scale slides back down, and we've communicated that to them all. And then thirdly is, as we receive product in shipping, in some cases we pay for that. In some cases, it's a direct charge to the end customer. When it's a direct charge to the end customer, they obviously pick up the burden of that cost. When it's a direct cost to us, we try to push that back onto the clients. So how it's affected us from a business perspective is stuff that we've already quoted, 6 months ago, a year ago, or whatever, and that work's coming through the pipeline. Obviously, we're taking a hit, from that. Anything going forward that we're quoting, we're actually quoting that additional cost in as part of our project. It's not a line item per se, but it's just, a magnitude increase in our GP when we quote projects.
Great.
So it's been painful, I guess, is the bottom line.
Mm.
Okay, well, first of all, guys, I really appreciate those were some great thoughts. Thank you all for some of the great questions. What I wanted to share, here's a few of my takeaways. I'm sure everyone that's listening in, you have your share, but I walked away with a few things. Number one, the importance of proactive management, not just customers and vendors, but also employees. And even shareholders. I think that's important. I think the second thing is that based on our research, we've seen very little, we don't see this changing in the near future. So this is going to be a problem, certainly over the next 2 years or so, at least. Adam talked a little bit about the importance of contingency planning. And specifically looking at alternative sources and dual sources and things of that nature. I'm sure many of you are doing that, but if you're not doing it, I think that's going to become a regular. Thing for all of us, that we're constantly doing that just as aggressively as we're out looking for, frankly, new customers. The importance of safety stock and adjusting your levels related to that. I think that was another point that Adam brought up. I think Paul talked about the importance of relationships, and perhaps there's some consortiums out there like he referenced when he was talking about Nate, that maybe would be very valuable for your organizations. Paul, being in a project business, also talked about the importance of cross-training. I think cross-training our people, because when you have people sitting idle, that's obviously very costly to any organization. And I think Adam talked a little bit about that as well, on the manufacturing side. So I think those are a couple of things. Adam also talked a little bit about adjusting contracts. So if you haven't thought about how are you going to adjust your contracts, which is just a formal communication method, probably should be looking at that. And I think the last one that Paul mentioned was really the importance of communication. And I think we always hear about communication in our businesses, both internally and externally. But I think, this whole supply chain issue really takes it to yet another level. So those were my key takeaways, and I'm sure there were some others out there. First of all, I want to thank Paul and Adam. Really appreciate you guys joining us. Everyone who's out there on the line, we really are appreciative that you joined us. Wanted to let you know that there are a few things that are upcoming. We've got all of our public leadership programs, personal leadership, team leadership, and organizational leadership. And believe it or not, people are already booking seats in those. So, if you have leadership development needs, please think of us. And then we're going to continue having these quarterly kickoffs. And you might say, well, it looks like a lot more than quarterly, because we've got one on April 27th. We've got one on July 13th. We've got one on July 27th. And then we've got two in October that'll be interesting. And they're topical. And in some groups, some of these are targeted toward executive level folks. And in some instances, it's really geared around CEOs. And that's why it's a little bit more than quarterly. So we want to exceed expectations for all of our customers. So we really appreciate you joining us. Thanks again, Paul. Thanks again, Adam. We're going to be sending this out. This was recorded, and I hope it was of value to you, and I hope you have a real prosperous quarter. Talk to you soon.